Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm Dev.
And I'm Hugh, and on today's show, we are looking at minute 22. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of the film here, and we are starting on the steps of one of the most famous high school buildings in American film and TV, the John Marshall High School in Silver Lake, LA, standing in here for Grosse Pointe Blank's own high school. And we are at the tail end of the conversation between lead character Martin Q. Blank, played by John Cusack, and his former school teacher, played by Belita Moreno. So, with us today is our guest, Darren Husted. Darren, how are you, sir?
I am doing fine.
Excellent.
Excited to go to the Ultimart and,
Isn't everybody?
Yeah.
We all want to visit the Ultimart. Where would people have heard you before, Darren? Given you you are far more experienced in the ways of the movie by minute podcast than we are.
I mean, I don't want to brag, but literally the first movies by minute podcast that I did was the third ever movies by minute podcast, which was a talking cat, which is about the film A Talking Cat. I was the editor for that, but I was only guest on like I think 5 episodes maybe, out of like 86. Wow. And that is a film that has long stretches where there is literally nothing going on screen. It is just there's a point where there's 3 minutes of a car just driving, and it's not clear who's in the car, where it's coming from, or where it's going to. So, very difficult to cover. So yeah, that was like 9 years ago. I think that started uploading. So the anniversary for that recently passed.
I have to ask, why did they pick that film then?
Why? Well, do you know what? Funny enough, there is a story behind that. It was covered by a podcast called The Flophouse, which covers bad movies, and they talked about A Talking Cat, which has an exclamation point, a question mark, and then an exclamation point. Though for listeners in the UK, it's known as Duffy the Talking Cat, and there's no fancy exclamation points or anything.
Okay.
And it had gained a reputation because a writer on the AV Club, Nathan Rabin, had written about how terrible it was and how basically nothing happens in the film. And so they covered it because of, it started to gain a bit of a reputation. And then in the Facebook group, one of the hosts said, this film is crazy enough that it could sustain a minute by minute podcast. The host of that podcast had been guests on Star Wars Minute a few months before, so they obviously were aware of that format. And a few people in the group were like, "Should we do this? Like, should we make a podcast about this that goes minute by minute?" And it just kind of snowballed from there. And then I ended up editing it. Yeah, so it's literally it's funny because some people are like, oh yeah, like what? Because occasionally people be like, oh, when was it on that episode that they said it could be? And I was like, no, it wasn't even on the episode. It was literally just a comment in a Facebook group. So
amazing.
Like if they'd actually said on the episode, oh, this could then people could understand. But it just came from somebody's suggestion, and then a group of 40 something of us were just like, okay. There was a couple of people who were like the hosts, but there was no like single host who went from the first minute to the last minute.
Oh wow!
It was just kind of a group effort. So there was a host who did about 20, 15 episodes each, but it kind of rotated, and it was kind of because there's very little in most of the minutes in the film. It was kind of some people had specific minutes they wanted to talk about, and so they kind of contacted me and my co-producer and said, can I be on this minute? And I was like, sure, let's just fill it up. We had a spreadsheet and we just started sticking names in and then just telling people go and record the episodes. And prior to doing that, I had never edited anything on like anything. So I just, people sent me these files and I put them together in Audacity and just started editing them. And that was,
wow.
Yeah. The first episode I think only runs about 15 minutes, but it took me about 5 hours to edit because I was literally going through like second by second.
First time you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These days I've got a bit quicker. So
I taught myself to edit at high school with VHS, so I know what you're talking about. It is, I think later on when I was working in the media, I think I used to say, if you want a half-hour video, you're probably going to be ending up shooting 2 hours and cut it all down. That tended to be that tends to be how it works. You know, you're going to have to do a lot to get it back down to where you need it. So, but you get quicker and better at it. Have you got to that point now where you recognise your own uh, uh, vocal
Yeah,
foibles
yeah.
when you see the curves in Audacity?
Yeah, it's funny because the most recent projects I've done again have been where we've had a group of hosts. I think for the Glass Onion it was 7 hosts or 9 hosts. I think it was nine. Well, I can't remember. But anyway, they're on a rotation. So the hosts, do like 4 stints, and the guests do one. So hosts do 20 episodes. So editing the hosts for the second or third time through, you by the time you've done like 15, 20 episodes of the same host, you kind of recognize you know uh, what things look like, and it's a bit easier for me to put stuff together. There's also the biggest issue is just when there was a set of minutes where the other person didn't have headphones, so you can hear both people on one track. So just cleaning stuff up is the kind of it's from my point of view, I just want to make sure that the minutes have been recorded and that's it. So that's all I'm after. So if I have to then spend some time afterward, like tidying things up, and then I've got to the point now where I'm fairly quick in terms of Audacity. I was just annoyed because the most recent version like got rid of a couple of shortcuts, and now I have to go into the menus to do stuff. So I was like, oh, this is a bit of a pain. But after like 9 years, but I mean, effectively like 9 years of editing on free software, I'm okay. I'm like, okay, I think at this point, like, you get what you pay for, don't you? So if I can use free editing software, then that's. But yeah, like literally, as we were getting to upload the first episode of Talking Cast, like I didn't even know how to get an RSS feed to work, so I literally spent like a couple of hours googling how on earth to like get it approved by Apple, how to get it uploaded, like all of that stuff was just completely foreign to me. So I was just like, we'd set a date for when the first episode was going to go up, but I was like, I haven't got like I had the episode edited, and then I was just like, what the hell do I do? So yeah, these days it's a little easier. I would also say that like the whole podcasting thing has got a bit more like there are sites out there that kind of do this thing and make it a bit easier for you. So there's like there's tools that you can use, whereas a decade ago it was a little bit more Wild West, and it was just like you have to submit it to Apple and just pray that they would approve your podcast. And it's like, and then you're going in and changing the size of the artwork over and over again to try and get it to match what they want it to be, and all that. It was a fun adventure. Kind of 9 years ago, just trying to figure out exactly how on earth to edit a podcast. But yeah, don't watch A Talking Cat. It's not a very good film.
Unlike Grosse Pointe Blank, which Dev,
which is
you have said,
great film.
Yeah, and Dev has said this before, and I'll let him say it one more time again on this. Dev, what is this film to you?
Oh, this is my favorite film of all time. This is categorically, hands down, my favorite film. I have seen this probably hundreds of times at this point. Yeah, absolutely. And in this minute, we have some great sequence. I think we've obviously got the very end of the high school. Miss Canada has to head off because they're playing her song. And then we break into what I feel is the oddest musical choice in this entire generally well-scored film of quite loud, grating Live and Let Die that turns into Muzak's Live and Let Die. I mean, I think it evokes the feeling of the Ultimart. It's very manufactured sounding music for a convenience store vibe. But it is very much in contrast to the music that's generally playing in this film, I feel.
I think that's the point. I think it is literally one of the greatest audio plus video edits in the history of cinema. I really do feel that, okay? Because everything we've been saying in these episodes about the character of Martin Blank and the journey that he's going on, right, is encapsulated in this minute, because the conversation, as you say, ends with Miss Canetta. She leaves, and he turns and there's no one there. But he says to himself, "Ah, Mrs. K," and he's kind of like slightly cheered up. You know, the half hint of a smile. He's not quite the sullen existentialist warrior we saw earlier on, right? He's starting to get a little bit of who he was back. Drives his car along. He's listening to Live and Let Die by Guns N' Roses. Very important, not the original Wings version, because it's the 90s. Cover versions, this is the thing, right? And Guns N' Roses are big. And it's that moment where the camera doesn't show you what he's looking at, but whatever he's looking at shocks him so much that he pulls his car over to the side, sits there looking at the camera, whatever it is he's looking, and there is a look that you cannot describe on his face. We've seen this man kill people. And this look on his face suggests that somebody else is going to die soon once he figures out what's going on. Gets out of the car, walks to the camera, still looking at the camera, and the lyrics as they're moving through it, right? You know, this is one of the more interesting Bond tracks, because for all of its Wings, obviously Paul McCartney's band after the Beatles, arguably the most of the Beatles who had hits after they broke up. That was the band that probably featured the most in the British top 30 at the time, regularly on top of the pops. You know, it's Roger Moore's debut film. It's a new Bond for a new era. The song itself represents lyrically, it's the old Bond and the idea of the killer who's worn out and, you know, who doesn't want to do what he does anymore. And should he? What's the cost? But musically, it's much more kind of grandiose and big and brash. And you know, it's McCartney in his post Hendrix phase rather than, you know, earlier McCartney. And of course that's the blaxploitation Bond, right? That's the Bond that rips off blaxploitation era films. Yeah. So all of that is bound up in this in this song, right? So when a black suited killer steps out of a car to the sounds of this song, right? And then when they switch around and you see that it's just a supermarket. It's just the Ultimart, right? And then you cut back to him and it's like, that look on his face, like, I am going to kill somebody now, right? Is just, it's so perfect for the song, because the song is literally telling us what's in his head.
Yeah.
And but obviously he says he's going home. When she's like, where are you going? The teacher is like, where are you going? He's like, I'm going home. So it's, you know, in terms of like, you know, what you're meant to do in films, it sets that up perfectly of like, as a viewer, when he arrives at Ultimart, you're not thinking to yourself, oh, he's like popped to get like some Gatorade or whatever. Like, you're thinking, oh, like the look on his face gives away that as a viewer you should know what's happening, which is this is now his home. His home is now an Ultimart, and you know, like something has clearly gone wrong in the time that he was away. You know, his indifference to, you know, his hometown has led to something catastrophic happening that is, you know, all over his face. But yeah, it's really weird because like Live and Let Die, like the way that, you know, the way that Paul McCartney sings it is kind of like a ballad that gets very heavy and orchestral, but like it wouldn't strike you as being like a rock song in that sense. But then Guns N' Roses, of course, they completely flatten the song out, so it is just nothing but a hard rock song. There is no like, there is a quiet part, but it's just Axl Rose's whiny voice, and then it's the rest. Then the band just come in. Like there's no levels. It's like literally, if you were to look at it, you know, in a you know, a music file, it would just be just a thick bar of noise with a few little dips where you've just got Axl singing, you know. But also, I think the lyrics, you know, fit well with Martin Blank. You know, the whole, you know, an open
absolutely.
book, like the whole, like he's not an open book. So it's like a deliberate contrast of like, like this is the exact opposite of what Martin Blank is. Like he doesn't say live and let live. He literally goes around killing people. So I just, you know, it might seem like an odd choice, but I think that it fits the kind of tone of the film at this moment perfectly.
And the changeover to Muzak is
perfect.
Literally one of
just heavenly.
Not only is it perfect, but it's also one of the main jokes I can remember as a music fan in the 90s was that, you know, we all used to joke about, you know, hard rock and grunge and the day that it becomes Muzak. You know, one of the great ironies of grunge in the 90s coming from Seattle is also where Muzak, the corporation, was born. And so it was always the joke that, you know, grunge will come back home one day, which of course it has done now. And this film, this one moment like encompasses this running joke that music fans had throughout the 90s in a number of countries. I mean, I made this joke with friends in Switzerland in the CD store. It felt like it's, in that sense, it almost prefigures High Fidelity. It's a knowing nod to people who love music and
It's
love
also,
genres of music.
in a weird way, it's like it's not the original that we're listening to start off with. We're listening to a cover, and then it turns into a cover
Cover of a
of
cover.
a cover, and you're like, just the transition of him opening the door, like just the way that it instantly switches from what I mean. I don't know if it's meant to be diegetic. Is he meant to be listening to that song, or is it just playing as he's driving?
Possibly, because it could be diegetic. I mean, it feels like it's diegetic because he's walking away from the car while it's playing, and the camera's still by the car. So and then, as you say, so let's go with the idea that they're both diegetic.
So as soon as, but it's a nice coincidence that like as soon as he opens the door, the song is at the exact same point. So it's almost as if this was playing wherever he was going to be. This was going to be the soundtrack to, him doing this. But then it just turns into that music, and that like the shock of going to where your childhood home should be and seeing like a shop. It's funny because like here in the UK, there are a lot of corner shops that are just literally converted like houses. It's just like a house on a corner, and someone just converts it, and it still has the door, as where it was, and it just has maybe slightly bigger windows rather than windows that you would get in a house. So it's weird because like to me, the idea of someone's home turning into a shop isn't that foreign of an idea. Like it is possible that I could go to some, some of my, particularly people I used to go to school with. I could probably go to some of their houses, and depending on where they were located, they could be now in a block of shops. Like it's not unheard of. But obviously here they've had to demolish the house and build a new structure. So it's kind of funny that that's like a very extreme thing.
And honestly, even that action feels unusual to me in the US, right? This is clearly, I mean, we've already said, like, Grosse Pointe is a suburb of Detroit. There's generally a lot more planning in construction here, and it's usually done in a much bigger scale. Having a single plot leveled and converted over to be retail when it's been residential feels really weird. And I'm sure it has happened, but and I can see why they'd want it, right? Having a small convenience store in the middle of a suburban area is, going to be very appealing because
you're
it's
printing
just
money
so
then.
convenient for everyone.
Right. Like everyone on that street and on that block is going to be going there every 5 minutes. Like it's so convenient.
Yeah, but I don't feel like it happens very often. I can't think of anywhere that I've been where you might have a strip mall near a residential area, but having just a single out store, or possibly two, because there's that Videopolis, and it's not clear if that's just like part of Ultimart or if that's maybe a separate business. But like, and with the parking lot and everything, it's very, very out of place. Like, I can see why he's kind of like, am I hallucinating this? Like the massive overacting as he gets out of the car and he's looking around for like a gotcha cam or something. Like, is this really happening? Like, am I tripping here? Like, is the car still there? Like, there's that closes up on his face, and he's looking at the Ultimart, and then he turns around to look at the car to be like, is
the car still here?
Yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is that every time I see this film, despite the music that's playing, the thing I always think of is Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi. Right? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot with a pink on it. I literally think of that lyric every time I see this. And I sometimes wonder, given George Armitage's background as a director, because he was from that era, I often wonder if he was that was maybe where he was thinking musically, but then they ended up soundtracking it differently. Because it feels like it would be literally that. But also your point about, I like you called it overacting, because to me it feels like it's the first time he's acting. Like he's been underplaying things so much, and it's always like and when he does go for it, it's like when we said in the Office episode, it's like controlled anger and stuff. But now he's home, he's in the fresh air, the sunlight. He's just talked to his old teacher. It's cool, She thought so much of him,
And
now
yet it
he's just
still looks like he's completely in shadow for the whole of this
completely,
sequence.
because he is. He is.
He's in the middle of broad daylight with nothing to cast a shadow, and yet somehow, well, it's the angle, right? The sun's behind him, but the other thing is, like, he does the least American thing possible here. He parks his car across the street and walks across the street and then across a basically empty parking lot. Like, I don't care how distressed you are as an American, you don't ever do that. Like, you will get back in the car and you will drive around to find the nearest parking space to the entrance to that Ultimart, because that's the American thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, that's like he's stopped his car because he's expecting to see his like childhood home. So probably the reason he doesn't get back in the car to like drive across is because he doesn't think, like, he's in this state of not thinking that exists, like that it isn't real, that it's some illusion.
Fair,
So he's just walking. He could be run over because he's not really concentrating. He's just literally walking straight across the road to what he's assuming is some kind of mirage, because he just doesn't think that that's really there. He's just like, and that's what I get. Like, it's just like he is completely stunned. And in the next few minutes we'll kind of get his reaction to the whole thing. But yeah, it's funny because like this Guns N' Roses track being here, I was never really a huge fan of Guns N' Roses. I like Appetite for Destruction. They were okay at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, but they were a notable low light, let's say. And this, aside from David Bowie saying the Lord's Prayer. But I just find it funny because I was thinking to myself, like, was this done for this film? Like, was it? And I just remember throughout the entire 90s, this was all over radio, like all the time. Like, it was, it was a mild hit, but because Guns N' Roses were falling apart so much, and basically this is like the last, like, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 was like the last time the original kind of lineup were together. It's like this got a ton of radio play even years after. So it doesn't, if he was listening to the radio, I would assume that a contemporary radio station, that wasn't playing, I don't know, ska from the 80s would be playing this type, like, this would still be a popular song 4 or 5 years after it originally came out, so it wouldn't be unusual to hear it. But yeah, and obviously, Axl Rose has a very specific type of singing. But I don't, like I say, if the whole song is kind of flattened out and just made to sound like very samey. But then, like, the next song they did was like November Rain, which was a gigantic hit, and again got tons of, mostly MTV, I think, was the benefit of that, like, the whole 9-minute video or whatever. So it's kind of funny that like when this film comes out, Guns N' Roses basically are spending the next God knows how many years, like 15, 20 years, making their next album. So it's kind of weird that it's like at the end of the 90s, Guns N' Roses were still popular, but like once you get into the 2000s, people are just like, aren't they meant to be putting an album out? Like, and that becomes the story, is like, basically Axl Rose firing everybody apart from Slash from the band. Like that becomes the narrative about Guns N' Roses. So it's funny because this is like the end of Guns N' Roses, like, popularity as just being a band.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, as you remember from the era, is also it was there were a lot of older rock fans who were not Guns N' Roses fans who took, as fans always do, took offence to the idea of someone treading on what was not really that hallowed ground, but suddenly becomes hallowed because it's been covered by a modern band, and there was definitely a sense of that what people feel, what a certain segment of the music listening population felt Guns N' Roses did to Wings' song is exactly what Ultimart have done to Martin Blank's life. And I think that's kind of, that's another part of the joke, isn't it?
If you're going to get offended by Guns N' Roses covering something, you should be more offended by Knocking on Heaven's Door. That is.
Oh no, I agree with you. But then
worse cover than this. And also,
absolutely.
there's some backing vocals on this from I don't know that we hear them in this particular part of the song that gets played, but from the lead singer of Blind Melon, Shannon Hugh,
Yeah.
did some backing vocals. And obviously,
Yeah.
by the time this film comes out, he's not alive. So died aged 28, not 27. So missed out on being in that club.
Poor guy.
Yeah,
Wow.
but I don't know. It's just the reason I wanted to talk about these minutes was that transition from Guns N' Roses to the Muzak, just perfectly timed with the opening of the door, the little ping on the doorbell, like like this, like you say, up until this point in the film, John Cusack has been doing his general John Cusackiness, which is to basically barely even move his face, to just he'll say lines but he's not really kind of being and then in these next few minutes he just goes so in the opposite direction. It's just such a great kind of transition between the kind of calmness that we've had up until this point, aside from him killing people, obviously, and just the reaction. I mean, I don't want to preview it, but like the reaction in the next minute is just my favorite thing in the entire film. Of that this kind of it becomes more of like what his personality is as he goes through the film. He becomes more and more, maybe the open book that they're talking about in this song.
So before we jump into the wrap up and the one thing that I find interesting that I feel is very telling about Martin Blank's character and where he's come from. This is a guy that when he returns to his hometown, the first place he goes is not actually home, it's his school. And it's not like he just kind of happens to drive by and slows down and looks out the window and thinks, oh yeah, like that's my alma mater. He's clearly stopped, parked up, got out and walked up to the school before he even sees Miss Canella. He goes to his school before he goes home. And I think that really kind of highlights like where he felt comfortable when he was growing up and what led him to a lot of the decisions that he made.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, they do. He talks about the fact that it's the leaving done. It's school. It's the ball, isn't it? At the end of high school when he decides, I'm out of here. So he's literally going back to the point where he left.
Yeah.
I mean, it fits with all the other ways that the film is segmenting and editing things together, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's doing what a reunion movie should do of telling the story of the high school years in parallel to the modern story.
Yeah. And again, it's part of the fun of the film, isn't it? The way all these stuff is laid out and dovetails so nicely, where we're seeing his life, we're retracing the steps of his life with him.
Yeah.
We start with where he is now, and then we move back with him bit by bit by bit.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
So this was minute 22 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your hosts, co-writers and co-producers Dev Zalagar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was Darren Husted. Darren, where can we find you?
If you just stick my name into any podcatcher of choice, you will find all the previous podcasts that I've done, which at this point are numerous, let's say.
You can also find us on YouTube, on Twitter /X/ whatever it's going to be named next if it continues to exist, as well as Spotify. And for all of those, we are at Debi Radio. That is DEBI Radio. And on our website, debiradio.com. And again, all of those, it's DEBI Radio.
And finally, if you want to talk to us on Facebook, of all places, you can find us in a listeners group. It's named Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's DEBI Radio. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't